And good morning. It's Tom Jordan. We're going to play a little game here, if that's okay with you. I'm going to tell you what the New York Times wrote, and you respond in your head if you think it's true or if it's false. Are you ready? All right, let's give it a whirl. Here it goes. The New York Times claims in a recent article that automakers want EV mandates. They are begging Donald Trump, the automakers are, according to the New York Times, begging Trump to institute harsh EV mandates because automakers love them so much. True or false? Well, you know the answer. In fact, I'm not going to insult you by giving it to you because it's so obviously false. Although I think I just gave you the answer. So no insult, please. It's fake news, as someone likes to say, and it's obviously such. So here are the EVs right here. And the reality is the New York Times puts out this article that Ford, General Motors, Stellantis, they love the EV mandates. But then the New York Times, if you read the article, fails to provide a single quote from an industry leader to back it up, not one. Instead, they feature some executive who's advocating to scrap all the government subsidies. That is much different. And then the Times glosses over decades of bipartisan emissions and fuel economy regulations as they force to credit Barack Obama as the origin of all of this, misrepresenting Donald Trump's regulatory adjustments as essentially erasing everything that Barack Obama put in place. He did erase a lot of bad stuff that Obama put in place, thankfully so. But in any case, it's embarrassing to say that, at least with the Great Lady, and we'll get into the real story in that in just a bit with my guest, Patrick Anderson from Anderson Economic Group. But it's an embarrassing article, and they should be ashamed of themselves. He, by the way, Patrick Anderson, drives an EV, but he knows their limitations and that EVs, or more accurately, BEVs, battery electric vehicles, they should not be mandated. They should be completely and entirely consumer driven, which right now they are not. So what do the automakers really think about EV mandates? Do they enjoy losing tens of billions of dollars? Did you know that, by the way, that U.S. automakers are bleeding billions of dollars producing EVs that consumers are not demanding? They don't want them. In fact, Ford and General Motors are set to lose $10 billion on EVs this year alone. It's proof the market isn't ready for forced electrification of the vehicles. It's a total disconnect. You know, the real progress comes from, as I said earlier, consumer-driven innovation, not government mandates or taxpayer-funded bailouts for really bad policy. So we're going to reveal more on this coming up with Patrick Anderson in just a bit. Also, we're going to get into the dangerous immigration issue, the illegal immigration issue, the crisis that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris gave us, along with pretty much every other elected Democratic politician currently in power via the federal government or your state government. They were mostly all in on this scam of illegal immigration, and now the chickens are coming home to roost. We have violent crime. It is going up, and it's going to be a big job to push back against all the ramifications that we are seeing in this country. So all of that is coming up in just a few seconds here on Tom Jordan Live. Just a reminder to chime in today. You can put down a comment there. You can ask me questions or my guest, Patrick Anderson, questions in the comment section, and I will get to those in just a moment. Also, a reminder here that the best way that you can help Tom Jordan Live is simply to subscribe to Tom Jordan Live wherever you get the podcast. If it's on YouTube, on X, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you're getting it, please let us know and just subscribe and then watch it and share it. That's a huge help to us here at Tom Jordan Live. All right, let's discuss this issue of criminal illegal immigration. Criminal illegal. It's kind of redundant, but that's the case here. Just in case you didn't understand what it is, it's criminal. And Americans are on edge as the border crisis is spiraling out of control. It has been for multiple years now, with over 1.4 million illegal immigrants already defying their deportation orders under this system that is riddled with weak enforcement and political ineptitude, negligence. And so tragic murders like those of Laken Riley and Rachel Morin, allegedly at the hands of illegal immigrants, allegedly, expose the human cost of this broken immigration system. It's more than that. It's seemingly it's not broken if you're all for what's going on right now, which in large part, much of the Democratic Party has been all for what you're seeing right there. Those are the obvious and warned about ramifications of illegal immigration. So the Biden administration's their refusal to act decisively shows a stunning disregard for the rule of law in the United States. And despite formal removal orders, most absconders remain in the United States. And they're exploiting these very lax policies and the government's failure to prioritize enforcement. They don't want to prioritize enforcement because they don't really want them to leave. It's chaos. And it is a direct result, kind of decades of neglect, but much more so and compounded by the current leadership in the White House and their failure to secure the border. And experts argue it's fixable. If you just kind of pay attention and do a few tweaks here, you can resolve the majority of this issue. You can target the absconders who are now in this country illegally and have been ordered to leave. You can tighten border security, and you can implement these swift asylum hearings. Pretty common sense, first steps. Pairing those actions with laws that ban sanctuary cities and mandating that local law enforcement cooperation. If you do that, that could turn the tide entirely. Strong leadership absolutely has the power to restore order and protect American lives and send a clear message that the United States will not tolerate lawlessness. So to these laws banning sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, that issue there, the fact that over 1.4 million illegal immigrants with formal deportation orders remain in the United States, many of them being hidden by elected politicians in these sanctuary zones, self-described. So Tom Homan comes in. He's Trump's border czar, and he's warning right now that sanctuary cities could face prosecution for harboring illegal immigrants in defiance of federal law. They're breaking the law as well to hold the sanctuary cities accountable for obstructing federal immigration enforcement. Federal law supersedes state and local laws, and they know this. The refusal to comply with federal detainer requests could be classified as harboring, should be, or obstructing, should be, justice. So charging local officials with these federal crimes, that's on the table. That's an option. Cutting off federal funding is what they're doing. They will be doing if they don't abide by federal law. That would create significant disincentives for sanctuary policies. It's amazing what's happening in these various cities around the country. And I'll get into Los Angeles, one of them, but Denver, Colorado, and just around the country, Chicago. The deportations of criminals need to occur. So here's what Tom Homan had to say.
If a judge orders them removed, they must be removed. What's the option? Let them stay? Because if you do that, if you send a message to the entire world, you can cross the border illegally, which is a crime. You can see a judge or not see a judge and get an order removal and not leave. We're never going to solve this crisis. So look, we got to execute those orders from the immigration courts. Right now, if you look at the data, 9 out of 10 people who claim asylum at our border will end up with an order removal because they simply don't qualify for asylum. So we had to remove them. And if we don't, shut down the immigration court. I mean, what the hell are we doing? If the judge's orders don't mean anything anymore, then shut down the immigration court, take the border patrol off the border. No. We'll give you a shot at claiming asylum if that's what you want to claim, but at the end of that, you get order removed, you're going home. And if you choose while you're here to give birth to an illegal to a U.S. citizen child, well, guess what? When you get removed, you can leave the child here, or you can take them with you. So we got to secure the border, we got to enforce immigration law, or we're never going to fix the border, and it leads to a big national security vulnerability to this nation. They still want to attack President Trump for what they call family separation rate, zero tolerance. Look, we prosecuted people, we put them in jail. The child can't go to jail with them. When I was a cop in New York, I was a police officer in New York, I arrested a father for domestic violence. The child couldn't go to jail with him, so that family got separated. I arrested fathers or mothers with DUI who had a child in the car. We separated that family. Law enforcement separates families all across this country every day, but they want a different set of rules for illegal aliens, and there just can't be a different set of rules. They can keep talking about the Trump's family separation, but you know they're not talking about the 300,000 children that were separated from their parents and smuggled in the country by cartels that they can't find. They never talk about the thousands of angel moms and dads whose children were murdered by someone that was in the country illegally. There's a separation because they buried their child. So, the left's message is wrong. It's misleading to the American people.
It absolutely is. And I don't believe this would have occurred if the journalists in this country did their job. Did you hear that? 300,000 children are now missing in this country because Joe Biden and Kamala Harris allowed them to be given to some sponsor, and the sponsor takes them, and they're probably being trafficked right now. Nobody can find them. They are lost. But you don't see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez coming out and weeping at the border for those missing children. She's not doing that. She was during Donald Trump's administration when some of these kids were being incarcerated because they came across illegally with their parents, and they were doing the same thing that Barack Obama did. But when Trump did it, they cried and wept as if this is somehow unusual. And Tom Homan's right. When you commit a crime, your kids shouldn't suffer along with you. So if you go out and rob a store, that person, if it's the dad, is going to be separated from his child. That is family separation because the kid shouldn't go to prison with the dad. So see what happens when you commit crimes. It disrupts a whole lot of things. It's not just you, it's also the family structure. And that's exactly what is occurring now. But it is a crime what this current administration has been doing because it's not just the hundreds of thousands of missing children, but it is the sex and human trafficking that is coming across our border. And that is funding, I think, billions of dollars to these drug cartels who are now profiting big time on sex trafficking into the United States as a direct result of this lax border policy. The media doesn't cover these things in large part. They should. If they did, and they were honest about it, this probably would never have happened. So I always push back on the so-called free press that isn't freely doing their job. They are under the thumb of somebody, and in large part, I think it's the party of the Democrats. And this is a topic that is shaping up to be a defining issue of President Donald Trump's return to the White House, sanctuary cities, and the fight to restore law and order at our borders. It's about time. I mean, Trump's new borders are, you heard him right there, Tom Homan, he isn't pulling any punches here because he can see the direct ramifications of this. He's putting sanctuary cities on notice, warning that their defiance will not go unchecked. So these local officials who think they can shield illegal immigrants from federal law are about to learn a pretty hard lesson. So Holman says he plans to seek Justice Department backing, which I think he'll get, to prosecute city leaders who harbor illegal immigrants. Yeah, you heard that right. Prosecute them with a crime. Why? Because impeding federal law enforcement and knowingly hiding individuals who have broken the law is a crime, period. You're not allowed to do that. There are supposed to be legal ramifications for that. So let's unpack what that means for these sanctuary cities like Los Angeles. Oh, Los Angeles, where the city council just doubled down on its sanctuary policies. And they are defying federal law by refusing to hand over illegal immigrants, even those accused of serious crimes. And Tom Homan has been crystal clear about this. Of course, that federal law does trump local virtue signaling every single time, especially in this case. If a city wants to play politics with public safety, there will be consequences. And those consequences could include cutting off federal funding. Now, think about that for a moment here. Think about the federal funds that keep the lights on in a lot of these jurisdictions, from infrastructure to public safety programs. These sanctuary policies could cost cities and states millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars. And for what? Why do they want to do this? To harbor people who have broken the law and in some cases do in fact pose direct threats to public safety. It's madness. And meantime, again, I'll point out the Venezuelan gangs that are now setting up shop, essentially, headquarters in 16 states now, and it's growing. The media keeps acting like this is not happening. And we know it is. And there are serious victims of this. And they're making millions of dollars, by the way, off the drugs, off taking over apartment complexes, and the sex traffic in particular with young kids and minors. We should care about that as a country. This should not be allowed. So Tom Homan, I'm glad he's serious about this. I wouldn't want his job, but he's making it clear that safety comes first in the United States, and the administration will focus on deporting illegal immigrants with criminal records. So there's going to be a priority list. They'll start off with the most serious criminal offenders or those accused of serious crimes. It's common sense. Why should any community be forced to tolerate the presence of dangerous individuals who shouldn't even be here? And they're being holed up in hotels and giving these debit cards and phones, and we're supporting them. It's about protecting Americans, not catering to political activists. So let's talk about border policies, the things we know that work. Homan plans to bring back the highly effective Remain in Mexico policy. Remember that? It required asylum seekers to wait on the Mexican side of the border. To wait in Mexico, maybe Tijuana is the spot. You got to sit until you've gone through the judicial process and it's been approved before you come into this country. Asylum seekers, the vast majority of whom do not qualify for asylum, need to wait on the other side of the border until it's approved. And if it's not, you got to stay over there. It worked. It was a game changer for border security. But when Biden took office, he tossed it aside. And then what happened? It was chaos. A border that was overrun with illegal crossings. Families were torn apart. And again, more than 300,000 unaccompanied migrant children have been lost under Joe Biden's watch. Many of them feared to be victims of trafficking and forced labor. Even the New York Times has admitted that. So Homan vows to find those children. I mean, that's leadership with a heart. Let's find the children who are missing. It's a backbone as well, countering this false narrative that's been out there that is more humane to not find these children and not to deport the most violent of these illegal immigrants. So there's also a potential partnership with Mexico here. Mexico's, new socialist government may try to resist reinstating these policies, but Donald Trump's got a track record on this, on negotiating with Mexico. It speaks for itself. This is what he did the first time around, his first term in office. And I think when Mexico sees Donald Trump at their doorstep, they will come to the table. They've done it before, and it's more than likely that they will do it again. They don't want to deal with the ramifications of ignoring federal law in this country. It isn't just about border security. It's about accountability. It's, these sanctuary cities and open border advocates have ignored the human cost of their policies for far too long. The Biden administration's lax approach, welcoming kind of approach, led to preventable deaths, murder. Yeah, murder, rape. Yeah, that happened. It wasn't disinformation like many at CNN and MSNBC tried to make it sound. No, a lot of people are being raped. The sexual trafficking and the abuse and assault that were occurring was it was paramount. It was huge. It was happening even amongst the ones who were coming over with the coyotes, is what they call them. They would be raped by those coyotes, the men who were bringing them over. And there's rampant trafficking with this. And these communities now, which are plagued with the crime, don't believe it when they say, oh, there's no crime taking place, that's racist. No, there is quite a bit. Denver, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, it's obvious. And it's pretty simple for Tom Homan and Donald Trump. If you won't follow the law, you are going to face consequences. It's a new era about putting Americans first, about securing the border and restoring sanity to a broken immigration system. These sanctuary policy cities and states are on the chopping block. Public safety is back in the spotlight, and the rule of law is non-negotiable. And I'll leave you with this on this topic as an aside. For many, many years, I covered the border, and I've said this before, so some of you are just going to, yeah, you said this before, Tom, but I covered the U.S.-Mexico border and the illegal immigration issue. And I've known many. I grew up in an area where I was friends with a lot of Hispanic individuals, some of whom came over the border. But the fact is, and some of them illegally. So you kind of grew up in this mix. But what we saw there, where I grew up, was San Diego. But it was the same thing in Los Angeles and all these border cities. San Diego, most specifically, right on the border there of Tijuana, and there's San Isidro right there, and Otay Mesa. But there were demonstrable. Everybody knew the ramifications and the consequences of illegal immigration, and it became very difficult to deal with because it drastically impacted the education system in California. Drastically, I mean the numbers would plummet. They started taking out the testing and the requirements because they weren't holding up to scrutiny. So much like what Michigan is doing right now, they would get rid of like third grade requirements and fourth grade requirements and testing and reviews on which schools are better than others, and all those kinds of the benchmarks were done away with because they had to. A lot of people didn't speak English, right? So you had to slow down the class and deal with the members of the class who didn't speak English. And part of it was your compassion. You want these kids to learn, but at the same time, the taxpayers involved in this were like, our kids are not being educated. And the cost to go to a private school in San Diego was astronomical, so that wasn't an option for the vast majority of individuals. But those people were getting a much better education because there's the whole school choice issue. That wasn't allowed, so that's a whole other topic. But you see how it just this domino effect occurs. And then hospitals were being overrun. I worked in a hospital, so I know this was true. We were trying to figure out what to do with our emergency department because the emergency departments in these hospitals, the emergency rooms were being used as primary physicians because if somebody came in who did not have insurance and could not afford treatment in an emergency room, you still had to treat them whether you liked it or not, as a doctor or as a staff or as a hospital. That was the law in California. So the healthcare costs started shooting through the roof as a result of that. And in California in particular, that's where it became so expensive. And then that, of course, impacts the insurance premiums. So you can see what we're doing here. And the crime in these certain areas were, yes, exponentially greater than other areas where it didn't have a concentration of illegal immigrants. And this is the thing that really stuck to me when I was covering this. It started to become, it's one thing when you come over illegally but you want to assimilate into the country. You want to become an American. Okay, that's noble and that's right. You want to assimilate into the values. You want to take on those American values. But more and more, and I would talk to these activists coming over from Mexico, said, we don't want to assimilate not one bit into the United States. We want to take this country over. And there became a movement to celebrate that back in around 2009, I think 2010 timeframe throughout California, and these huge marches in Los Angeles and San Diego, and I think up in San Francisco, were marching saying, listen, we're not going to assimilate into the United States. We want to take this state and make it Mexico, speaking of the state of California. So there was that aspect of it as well. The greater the population count, the more that movement was gaining steam. So that was a real issue. Now, when you talk about it in the flyover states like Michigan and whatnot, people don't understand the history behind it, and they think this is all brand new. No, this has been something that's been the border states have been dealing with for a long time. And it's just the truth. So that's why there are secure borders. They're supposed to be. That's why you have to push back against illegal immigration. And the Democrats used to embrace that up until about 10, 12 years ago. Barack Obama's first term, he was fully opposed to illegal immigration. By the second term, he started to support it. You can watch it because he was introducing it slowly. That's how they work. Okay, enough on that. Thanks for hearing me out on that, my positions on this. Coming up in a few moments, we're going to, is it true? I brought this up earlier. Like, does the New York Times, are they correct that automakers who are losing billions of dollars on electric vehicles, that the automakers are begging for stricter mandates on how they do business? Like, do the automakers want the government to step in and say, you have to make that kind of car, you can't make that kind of car? New York Times puts out a headline saying, yeah, the automakers are begging Trump to do that. We don't think that's true. We're going to reveal the truth behind the fake headlines and why consumers and taxpayers might be paying the ultimate price for that. That's coming up with Patrick Anderson in a moment. But first, a quick message from Executive Wealth Management. Wealth is complex, but with the right partner, it doesn't have to be. Executive Wealth Management is dedicated to simplifying the complexities of managing your wealth by offering integrated solutions that cover every aspect of your financial life. From retirement and financial planning to investment management and even tax and legal strategies, Executive Wealth Management brings it all together so you can focus on what matters most to you, living your life with confidence. Their team of experts works seamlessly across these key areas to ensure your financial future is secure and well managed. They take the stress out of wealth management by providing a comprehensive, personalized approach that's tailored to your unique needs. Discover how they can simplify your financial journey. Visit EWMadvisors.com. That's EWMadvisors.com and learn more about their integrated wealth management solutions. Executive Wealth Management. Wealth is complex. They simplify it. Okay, so let's get to this. The headline from the New York Times. Here's how it reads. Automakers to Trump, please require us to sell electric vehicles. That's the headline. And that headline for the New York Times suggests that automakers want EV mandates. But the article fails to quote industry executives affirming that stance. Instead, the single executive that was quoted in the piece advocates ending all government subsidies, not expanding mandates. So it's a completely different topic. The article absolutely misrepresents other things as well, like the origins of the emissions and the fuel economy regulations. Because remember, they love Barack Obama at the New York Times, and they say that Barack Obama was the originator of these, fuel economy regulations and these emissions regulations. They started decades before Barack Obama ever took office. Those fuel economy standards were established in 1975. The Clean Air Act in 1970. So the article's suggestion that Trump erased regulations is really misleading, as the regulatory adjustments are really part of ongoing industry government negotiations. So things get changed all the time. And despite the improvements in EV technology, the charging infrastructure that's been improved is still not there yet. And the affordability aspect of this, the industry faces significant losses in their electric vehicle operations. General Motors and Ford collectively are reporting billions of dollars in losses. And that alone is a clear indicator that EV production remains financially fraught, and the automakers don't want those kind of mandates that are going to cause them to lose billions of dollars, right? So, and then there's a whole idea of consumer-driven EV adoption, and that's how it normally works in a free market and a free society. So Patrick Anderson, who we're going to talk to in a bit, his personal choice, he drives what's he calls a battery electric vehicle, BEV, BEV. I don't know if they use that as the acronym BEV. It's a battery electric vehicle, EVs, however you state it. He drives one, and he says, listen, it's consumer preference. That's the whole idea. I like the EV, but I don't like a lot of the weaknesses in it. He doesn't like the mandates. And he thinks consumer choice can drive the adoption once the industry is actually factually ready to adopt electric vehicles if consumers want them. But barriers to mass adoption remain, including the costs and the infrastructure. There's not nearly enough working electric vehicle chargers around any highway. And then there's a whole role of policy here. His commentary, Patrick Anderson, he's suggesting that Congress and the administration should prioritize, the input from actual industry leaders and consumers, not rely on these narratives that are out there unsupported by industry consensus. And listen, I remember when, who's the leader in electric vehicles, do you think? Anyone got to guess which individual has done more for the electric vehicle industry than anybody? Yes, you're right. You're correct. It's Elon Musk. Elon Musk was not allowed at these confabs with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris when they wanted to talk about electric vehicle and the industries and what they weren't allowed there. Because why? Because I think they didn't have union employees. Well, suddenly, if your EV wasn't made by a union-backed laborer, I guess it didn't work, as they said it would. That was the craziness of this. So we're going to bring in Patrick Anderson in just a moment. We have Patrick Anderson. He's here yet? Okay, we're waiting for Patrick. He's going to give us a call in the meantime. We do have a comment though I want to bring up before we get Patrick. Let's bring that up right now since we have a moment to talk about this, and it is Jim Chikowski. How you doing, Jim? Good to see you. Do you think Trump's recent statement to put a 25% tariff on Mexico imports will help to stop the new incoming wave of illegals? Oh, I see. So you're gonna combining that with the illegal immigrants. I don't know. I haven't thought about it in that way, Jim. I do think, despite I know a lot of conservatives don't like these threats of terrorists. I actually like them quite a bit because, I mean, that's a great example. When he put that 25%, the threat of, and I think he even went up to 100 or 200%, that Mexico decided not to allow that Chinese electric vehicle plant to be built in Mexico. And they say, okay, we'll build it in the United States instead. It worked. It's a negotiating tactic. And I think that's why I like that aspect of it. The other aspect, maybe not so much, but as it relates to illegal immigration, Jim, I'm not really sure. I have to put more thought into that. All right, let's bring in Patrick Anderson. He is the founder, the principal, and the CEO, the top guy at Anderson Economic Group. Patrick, it's good to see you again. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Nice to see you, Tom. Interesting. I've been listening to you here talk for a few minutes. Yep. And I drive a BEV, as they say, a battery electric vehicle. Yeah.
I think, though, I wonder if they're going to call it BEV. I mean, it's. I know somebody named Bev, and I thought, well, that's actually maybe a bit better than BEV. I don't know if you've gone
Yeah.
down that route yet, but I think BEV is the standard now. Is that what you call it?
Well, I use that because electric vehicles, sometimes people mean hybrid gas electric vehicles of different types. And the big push by the government is to have people drive full out battery electric vehicles. So to be precise, I use the term BEV. And usually when I talk about what's the adoption of electric vehicles, and I say we got 7 or 8% of the market, I'm talking about BEVs. Now,
Okay.
hybrid electric vehicles, in which the primary propulsion is usually a gasoline engine, are doing extremely well, and I think that there's going to be big growth in that portion, and both American, Japanese, German manufacturers all make these. Korean manufacturers, including at the U.S., we can be very very effective with that and meet consumer needs. But the
Yeah.
government's mandates right now are primarily about battery electric vehicles, so that's why we use the term BEV.
Yeah, I like it. I like the specificity on it, and it does more accurately define it because I think the hybrid situation is brilliant. A few years back, when like Toyota and some of these Japanese automakers said, "Yeah, we're not going to go in the EV space just yet. We're going to go with the hybrid model because that seems to be where what the consumer demand is, and frankly, with the technology where it is today, that makes more sense." And I loved it. But it sounds like the American automakers are starting to kind of push in that direction. But I want to get to this New York
Yeah,
Times article that you wrote, and I mean, not that you wrote, that you wrote about, and
yeah.
it's incredibly telling where the state of journalism is right now. The New York Times basically says the New York Times, the automakers to Trump, please mandate that we sell electric vehicles. And then you go through it like you did with a fine tooth comb, and there's no executive out there who's actually claiming that, at least not that was quoted by the New York Times. I guess a couple things here. First off, why would the New York Times, in your view, write such a misleading piece, at least such a misleading headline, in your view?
That's a very good question, Tom. And I'm glad you saw that. And anybody who's on LinkedIn can see that from me. I think there's a whole bunch of people that have reprinted it, so you can see it. But you can also just, if you don't believe me, it's on the front page of either the front page of the whole paper or the front page of the business section. Detroit automakers to Trump, please require us to sell electric cars. A bizarre thing to say in an industry where Ford and GM each are announcing multi-billion-dollar losses every quarter on building and selling electric vehicles. And that's just one portion of the subsidy and the loss here. There's also dealers that have bought these and are on their lots. They're having trouble selling them. There's consumers like me that have suffered a great deal of depreciation, much more than on other cars. And there's cross subsidies also that are not being counted. But you see zero industry leaders demanding that the government force them to sell something on which they're losing money. And you can obviously see that. I mean, you don't need to be an economist. You don't need to wear a bow tie like I am, Tom, to get
Although I
that.
would
If
recommend
you
it.
are,
I should have worn
if
mine
you are,
today.
if you are losing money, one of the things you don't want to have happen is have the government force you to continue to lose money. But yeah, the New York Times has that there, and I think it's pretty clearly, and I point out in that commentary that there's a rearguard action to re-explain the election and try to convince people who were just elected that all those things that they heard from voters were all wrong, and that
Right.
that really the folks in Washington D.C. That are lobbying, and generally the the folks that have supported the approach of the Biden administration, they were right, and actually the industry wants that.
Yeah,
I
I
don't know how
feel
many
like
people it's going to convince here in
right.
Michigan,
Well,
but
that was my thought because we just went through this election.
yeah,
And it's like the New York Times editorial staff didn't get the memo from the Democratic Party that no, we now believe in the free market. So we're kind of pushing back on what we thought we believed in about 6 months
yeah,
ago. Even Alyssa Slotkin has come out and said people should have a choice with which
yeah,
kind of car they drive, and she voted for a lot of these mandates as well. So
yeah.
the tide has shifted a bit here, but the New York Times is making this claim that do you think it's in part because maybe the New York Times A doesn't believe in the free market, and B, if they force people to buy electric vehicles, then the automakers will somehow start making their money that they're losing right now.
And I would just want to clarify, this wasn't the editorial staff. If it was editorial staff, I wouldn't even written anything. I was like, okay, that's their opinion. This was the news staff. This
Oh
was a
yeah,
news article. I'm going to put news in quotes because it obviously wasn't hard news. It was opinion. But there have to be some people in the automakers that have made agreements with the Biden administration in particular related to the huge Inflation Reduction Act and infrastructure law subsidies for plants, and that have part of their careers, I think, staked on the concept that 20 or 30 or 40 or 50% of Americans would voluntarily buy an electric vehicle if we just put them out there. And they may be urging other folks to write these stories, but again, you have zero auto industry executives that are willing to say to their shareholders, we want the government to force us to sell the cars that are losing your money every quarter.
yeah. You're right to point out that this was not the editorial staff. That these are reporters, and I get confused nowadays because even like I read the New York Times or I can read the Associated Press, and these articles read like it's an opinion piece, an
Yeah.
op-ed, when in fact it's just an article that's being written by some far left liberal progressive reporter who has an ideology that doesn't allow him to be objective any longer as a journalist, and it drives me absolutely nuts. The reality is, you just said there are zero executives who are saying what the New York Times headline says. In fact, it seems that they're saying the opposite. Like they are actually kind of opposed, maybe not just kind of, fully opposed. And I've talked to some behind the scenes who don't want to come out and openly admit that they don't like what the government is doing right now. But when you looked at some of these stricter emission rules that Joe Biden has put out there, which complicate their already very complicated and difficult transition to electric vehicles, exacerbates their financial losses more and more every year. Do you feel like a lot of these automakers will start becoming more vocal in their opposition to these mandates?
I think that's inevitable here. I mean, there's a reckoning that's occurred. There's two reckonings that have occurred, Tom. First, there was an election. I mean, and the auto industry was on the ballot in a way I can't recall. You had one candidate that, not only was aggressively against the policy of subsidizing EVs, but actually started to bash them. And you had another that was running on the record of an administration that made it a signature. Their proudest accomplishments were the Inflation Reduction Act and the subsidies for building electric vehicle plants, pictures of President Biden driving F-150 Lightnings and, pictured with auto execs and talking about Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, coming to East Lansing right here and basically saying, and I'm quoting him here, that those folks that are questioning whether we should have electric vehicles everywhere, well, I think it's like those people talking on landline phones. He literally mocked people who have reservations about electric vehicles in the home state of the auto industry. So it couldn't have been more clear. And people like me are saying, hey, the auto industry shouldn't be the front page issue, but it was. And people voted. And even Michigan, I mean, the Midwestern states voted for Trump. I mean, it can't get any clearer than that. And again, hundreds of reasons why you may have voted. I'm not telling anybody they should recast their vote or regret their vote, but the message was pretty clear. That's reckoning number one. And then reckoning number two has been occurring for the last 3 years. Companies like ours, like Anderson Economic Group, that advise people in the auto industry, we said we thought electric vehicle penetration would grow. And in fact, it has. It used to be 2%, then it was 4%, then it was 6%, then it was 7%. That's considerable growth, pretty much as we'd expected. But the federal government mandates are for 56%. Let me just repeat that. Not 5%, not 6%, 56%. By 2030, that's not that long away in manufacturing years. So it's a huge gap. The reckoning has already occurred. We're already losing money building these. About 7 or 8% of the American populace that buys vehicles wants one. They should have every right to have one. We want them to have it. But to try to force the industry to sell it to 20 or 30% of people who don't want one, that makes no sense at all.
I wonder often about this reckless spending that has occurred and these bills that have gone through, such as the Inflation Reduction Act. And I know that deals more specifically with all sorts of, renewable energies, not just electrification of vehicles. But there's been a lot of money that has been spent and approved by Congress and by this White House to go full bore into this BEV space. And, even this Chinese battery plant that's scheduled to be built in the state of Michigan, Goshen itself, a lot of money being poured into that and the planning. And it seems to me that if I'm reading and if you're reading the trends correctly, that those might all be for naught. Like they may never come to fruition. Like that might just be wasted spending. Do you think that's a possibility here, that we may have wasted hundreds of billions of dollars on something that will never be borne out?
It's a high possibility, Tom. I mean, let me talk about a plant that's already built, the Orion Township plant. And I grew up in Lake Orion, so I remember when that plant was built. And that it's been one of General Motors' most important plants. And they shut it down to convert it to building electric vehicles. And right now it's still waiting for electric vehicles. They postponed. How many hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into that? And think about all those people that used to work there and the suppliers all around it in Oakland County. It's chock full of auto suppliers right up I-75 there. And, we're not building any cars there. So there's an object lesson of a plant that was built in America, American workers building American cars that Americans were buying, and we shut it down to make cars that right now Americans aren't buying.
I feel like this is just going to be. Go ahead.
I was going to say part of this is the market. You're in business. You never know for sure who wants to buy what, but in this particular case, we have been big wrong at the government level on where the market's going.
Big wrong. And to me, it's just another of many case studies of while something looks good on paper or this thought in your mind about an eventual utopian, society, how it never comes to fruition, and the mandates along the way to get there always end up failing, and you leave in disappointment. And I try to help people understand that's why the free market is so important, because it's tested, it's highly observed, and experts are saying, okay, what do people actually want, what benefits them, what will they buy, what will they like, and let's meet their needs as they exist today and what we think they're going to exist in 5 years from now, rather than the government coming in for some false utopian dream that is never going to materialize. And it always leads to devastation and heartache and disappointment and lost money and revenue and all these things that are just not good. Never pans out. These subsidies that I know there was one executive that was quoted in that New York Times piece that says, well, I do support is getting rid of these taxpayer subsidies. And I agree with that because they didn't seem to work. I mean, there were pretty significant subsidies that the government says, listen, if you buy an electric vehicle, we will give you $7,500 here, and it might even be more than, depending on what state you buy the car in. But they didn't work at all. Or am I reading that incorrectly? Did they kind of
Actually,
work, kind of not?
the original federal government subsidy for this was the following: you can get up to $7,500 off taxes that you actually are paying, so it wasn't it wasn't refundable. If you buy on using your own money an electric vehicle, and we'll allow that up to, I think it was 200,000 units per manufacturer, so it wasn't favoring one manufacturer or another. And the idea was, it actually dates to George Bush administration, was we should have the capability of building these. No one was mandated. No manufacturer was forced to do it. No one was forced to buy it. And there was a limit on how much you'd pay. And in fact, taxpayers would never send a check to somebody who didn't already pay taxes. So it was a reduction off of taxes that they already did. That was an effective way of gradually encouraging the development of electric vehicles and not penalizing a manufacturer that didn't want to jump in with both feet. Now, Tesla obviously jumped in with both feet. They were the first one to reach the cap. General Motors was the next one because they jumped in maybe with one. Now they're in with both feet. And good for them. But with the Inflation Reduction Act, we've completely flipped this. Now it's a broad-based subsidy. And with the expansion of the way the Biden administration has interpreted it, now there's nothing to limit these cars to cars built in the United States or the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. These are being subsidized now that have heavy Chinese components, that have all kinds of things. There's no income limit because they've reinterpreted the law in such an expansive fashion to allow an open door subsidy. And now you're at hundreds of billions of dollars between that, the subsidies for the charging, the subsidies for the production facilities, the commercial fleet credits. As President Biden himself said, we shouldn't have called that the Inflation Reduction Act. We should have called it the Green Economy Act. And that's what it is. And the actual price tag for the Inflation Reduction Act and the related subsidies may end up being $1 trillion, not $200 billion.
That's amazing.
Trillion.
Well, and they called it the Inflation Reduction Act because at the time that they named it, inflation was through the roof, and they were trying to get out some false narrative of what they were going to do to fight it. Hey, if you don't mind, Patrick, we got a comment here from somebody who wants to ask you a question. Let's bring that up. It's Harry Sakelian. Well, he says, "Hi, Tom. Please ask Mr. Anderson if the billions of dollars of losses on BEVs is after government subsidies. Thanks, Harry Sakelian." Is that after
Harry Sakelian is paying attention this morning. Way to go,
Yes,
Harry. Yes. The multi-billion-dollar losses that I was citing from Ford and GM are after government subsidies. So they're in addition. And so those are directly subsidies from shareholders. They're also, if you are a buyer of a GM or Ford car and it's an ICE car, especially if it's a pickup or an SUV, you are paying higher price to subsidize the electric vehicle because that's just how businesses do that. And I'm not going to say GM or Ford's doing anything wrong. They charge more on the vehicles that are in high demand and use some of that to subsidize the vehicles that they're introducing or that they have to spend a lot of money in developing. So that's in addition to that.
Yeah, good question, Harry. Thanks so much. Yeah, yeah, that's just another example of how the consumer ends up getting punished if they buy something that the government wants them not to buy. That would be a gas vehicle right now. So that's going to cost more because the automakers have to do it because they're also being punished because they're forced by these fuel
Yeah.
emission standards to make electric vehicles. You brought up Pete Buttigieg earlier. And I want to
Yeah.
ask you about him because he actually lives in Michigan. He's in the Traverse City area. And there's rumors going around that he might actually take a stab at a run for governor in the state of Michigan. And I look at that and I think, well, other than his well known name, what has he done that he can like hang his hat on? And I think, okay, transportation secretary, what did he do that was good? And I look at this specific issue, which he was one of the most, vociferous voices supporting this
Yeah.
rapid transition to electric vehicles. And he was tasked with, putting in this vast electric vehicle charging system throughout the country. I don't see a lot of them around. Have there been? I think billions have been donated or not donated, spent for or approved by Congress to allow this to be spent for charging stations. Do we have any numbers on where Pete Buttigieg is at on that effort?
Yeah, we do, and it is kind of embarrassing, Tom. And I'm going to say I did criticize Pete Buttigieg, I think is how he likes to pronounce his name,
Yes.
for coming to Michigan and mocking people who preferred to drive a nice car and comparing them with people who are stuck with landline phones. I don't think that was fair. I think it was mocking. But this is not a completely fair comparison, but it is accurate in terms of the numbers. I think I'm not sure if it's 10 or 70 or how many $billion there is on the charging, the federal government subsidy to build charging stations. We have spent that much money, and I think there are 8 charging stations open now.
8.
8, and for those
8.
that want to
They
hear
8, like the number 8, like around the country. 8.
yeah, like I'm going to hold up my fingers to the radio here. Let me see, 8. There we go.
Yeah, there it is. It is 8.
8. And now the defense that's been given by the Treasury Secretary is that, well, we've allocated this money and it hasn't all been completely spent yet, and some of them are being built and everything. But let me say, it is November 2024, and
Yes.
I think those people who are dialing in with landline phones or otherwise listening to this
Yes.
broadcast using technology that's more than 4 years old, they might ask the Treasury Secretary, well, if you were trying to force me to buy an electric car now, how can you say that I have to, it's wrong to ask a question about all the tens of billions of dollars that you've spent on charging stations that aren't built yet? So they've got a point too.
Yeah, you're right. It is embarrassing. And the fact that only 8 have been built with those billions of dollars spent to do this, it's like the people with the landlines they could have done this a lot more quickly. I think the answer, I mean, it wasn't exactly Operation Warp Speed, right? In 2020, somehow that administration was able to develop some vaccine, Operation Warp Speed, in months. And this is taking years. We've got 8. That is stunning to me. And that just shows you the operational efficiencies of government aren't really up to
Yeah.
par with the private sector.
Yeah, and if you can look at the Anderson Economic Group website, we actually have maps that we've done where we identify where within Michigan there's fast chargers, and it has improved. It used to be abysmal, and now it's a little better than abysmal. Let me say where it is. As a BEV driver, literally, Tom, if I got in the car here, not too far from the state capitol, and drove to downtown Detroit, I couldn't do that and drive back comfortably without having to stop. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the places I'd have to stop are few and far between, and they might not work. I can tell you from memory where they are.
Yeah, right. There's not that many of them. Might I recommend you take a Ford Mustang, a
Right.
V8 or something. You
If
might
I
have
took
better
a
luck.
10-year-old Ford Mustang, gas powered, I'd have no problem. I would
Yes.
get down there and back. If I
Yep.
Right?
You'll be secure in that baby, I tell you, and you'll feel good
Yeah.
driving it. Listen, I do support people driving BEVs if that's what they would like to do, but
Yeah.
winter's coming. It's going to get
Yeah.
cold. They might not, the duration of your travel time might be severely reduced based on that. I can't thank you enough. I enjoy reading what you put out there on LinkedIn, and people can find all sorts of great information on your website at Anderson Economic Group. Patrick Anderson is the principal, the CEO, the founder, and again, the top guy at Anderson Economic Group. Patrick, always good to talk to you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, Tom, have you and your listeners have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, and enjoy your Thanksgiving as well. Appreciate it so much. Yeah, it's amazing, and I think it is audacious, if you want to use that word, for the New York Times after the election, which Patrick brought up. It was such a good point that they kind of missed the whole thing about what had just happened. This whole idea that, okay, the gray lady, people don't really trust you anymore because of all these things you've been saying turn out to be, we think, fabricated and objectively not true. And then they come out with this fabricated headline about what the auto industry wants. It makes you think, okay, either they're not really covering the auto industry, like they're just making stuff up. They had a dream last night and they said, hey, let's do this. Or they're so ideologically unobjective and they still want to find this utopia, even though it's not going to happen. They still want to deceive people into believing this is a good thing. Believe me. It's like the end of Scooby-Doo type of thing. Anyway, we got some, if you get the reference, we got some comments. Let's bring them up here one by one. Let's go to Taz is back. Hi, Taz. Allowing local governments to ignore higher government laws. If you take that logic to the end point, a society devolves back to fiefdom and essentially feudal lords. So the idea, he's talking about illegal immigration, and it's the federal government's job to keep this country secure and to maintain our borders. And with the current administration right now, what they have done is they've ignored federal law, the laws that they are supposed to implement that are on the books. They've ignored them under the Biden administration, and they've chosen to ignore them on purpose. So remember in Texas, they said, well, we care about our safety in the state of Texas, so we're going to come in and we're going to start implementing laws that are on our books here because people are dying, people's property is getting stolen, all these things are happening. The federal government comes in then and says, you can't do that. That to me would be an abuse of federal power. That they're not they're not enforcing their own laws to protect people in Texas. They're preventing Texans from protecting themselves as well. That would be more of a overreach of government authority, and that would be my concern about centralized power. In this sense, their one main job, one of them, is to protect us from foreign threats, and that includes people coming over our borders illegally. And the federal government has to do that. So to me, that is one area where the federal government must make that a priority to protect the states. And if the states are impeding on individuals' right to safety and security, then the federal government has a constitutional right to push those state or city leaders away. And it's criminal that they're doing that because they are violating the individual civil rights of American citizens. So that, to me, is the way I view this situation. It would be right for the federal government to step in and to hold these local leaders accountable because they're infringing on their citizens' rights. And that is against the U.S. Constitution. But appreciate it. It's very insightful. Thanks so much. Let's take the next comment here. From the engineer, Tom, illegals are issued court dates. Most of them skip this date with no repercussions. You're right, they do. Can the federal government issue rewards to bond agents and bounty hunters for their capture and return? That would be a very interesting situation. I don't know how the law works, but I do believe that individual citizens can be deputized, right? So, and there's been, even recent precedent where county sheriffs have deputized some of their citizens to help fight areas of crime, that, very specific role to help them combat crime in their areas. So, yeah, I think you can do that. It'd be, akin to sometimes the U.S. military has to hire a private contractor to help them out in various efforts in wartime, either by developing the weapons or sometimes even taking up some of the fights. Wasn't it, was it Blackwater or Backwater? I forget what that group was. Not that it's all up and everything. But in terms of this, a citizen can be deputized to help fight crime. And that would be this case here. Good point. The engineer, as always. Let's bring up another comment here. It is Harry Sakalian is back. Hi, Tom. I'm hoping Tom Homan also focuses on the NGOs that aid and abet illegal immigration. Sadly, many are faith-based. Harry Sakalian, you're correct about that. I think it's Catholic Charities, and there's a Lutheran group out there as well that are acting as these NGOs, and they're teaching them how to subvert American law, and they're helping to fund them, and they're receiving tax dollars. So, in effect, it's like one step removed from taxpayers funding illegal immigration. Because remember, these NGOs are using that money to help them, I don't know, what clothing or cell phones, guides, brochures, and telling them how, step by step, how you evade the authorities, what you need to say when you're confronted by a Border Patrol agent, and this is how the law works. Let's get you in to the United States. That's what they are doing. And I do hope that Tom Homan goes after them, and I think he will if they're violating the law. Thanks so much. Good point. Last comment here. It's going to be from... R. Paulus is back. Hi, R. Paulus. Government has no business in business, ever. Leave capitalism alone. Amen. They shouldn't be in it. And we're talking about specifically the electric vehicle industry, funding certain companies to make sure that they get an upper hand in the private markets of automobiles. It's been wrong since the get-go. They shouldn't be doing this. And even the subsidies. The one thing that I agree with subsidies is what Patrick Anderson pointed out. If they're dealing with taxes specifically, like if they say, okay, we won't tax you if you buy this product. Okay, that's one thing. They have control over their own revenue stream. And if they don't want to tax me, I'm totally fine with that. But when it comes to giving you taxpayer money if you buy something, that's wrong. And they should never have done that. Very much appreciate all your comments here and staying tuned to Tom Jordan Live. Of course, we will be back right here tomorrow, 9 a.m. on Tom Jordan Live. God bless you. Have a great day.